Mallory Trent didn't know what made her hands tremble more: the cold autumn wind crawling through her cracked windows or the strange package on her doorstep. It was an old, battered box, wrapped in what looked like waxed canvas and tied with a leather strap. No return address, no postage. Just a yellowing note, wedged beneath the strap in a careful hand. The Silence Remembers. Inside, nestled like a relic, was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Her breath caught. Mallory, an audio archivist specializing in forgotten oral histories, had seen plenty of vintage recording equipment. But this model was a prototype, a model never released publicly, known only to a handful of collectors. It was dusty, crusted in patches with dried mud or perhaps soot, and it smelled faintly of burned wood and wet moss. There was a single reel loaded on it, labeled in fine script, Thornewood, Final. Curiosity prickled her skin. She threaded the tape. What emerged from the speakers wasn't music or clear speech. At first, it was only static, crackling, intermittent, with long silences in between. Then came the whispers. Faint, layered, overlapping like wind through dead leaves. She pressed her headphones closer. There, beneath the hiss, the Silence Remembers. The same phrase, in a voice too old and dry to be living. She listened for hours. There were fragments of words in a language she couldn't identify, and tones that resonated unpleasantly in her spine. The tape ended in sudden quiet. But for Mallory, it was just beginning. The name Thornewood triggered nothing at first. A few online searches turned up next to nothing. No modern references, no map listings. She dug deeper. University archives, oral folklore, obscure regional histories. A single mention at last, buried in the Newcastle Historical Society's 1911 journal. The village of Thornewood, last seen whole in 1898 before the Night of Echoes. Declared lost. No recovery expedition succeeded. She stared at those words, heart thudding. No GPS coordinates, just a vague indication that it had been located in the moorlands near the Scottish border. A ghost village, gone for over a century. She couldn't resist. Mallory packed light, audio gear, notebooks, an analog camera, a small camp stove, and rations. A week's trip, she told herself. Enough to locate the ruins, capture the atmosphere, maybe find the source of the recording. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. The moorlands were desolate in early October. The sun rarely cut through the clinging mist that seemed to rise from the peat itself. Mallory followed the old maps, triangulating the scant clues she'd found. On the third day, she saw the stones. First, scattered pillars rising from the heather like crooked teeth. Then the outline of a cobbled path, mostly devoured by moss. Finally, the remains of buildings, roofs caved in, walls overtaken by ivy and age. Thornewood. It didn't feel abandoned. Every footstep echoed, though the earth was soft. The silence was thick, textured, broken only by faint rustling that had no source. Birds avoided the place. So did the wind. It was as though sound was swallowed here, dampened and delayed. Her recorder behaved oddly. Signals dropped, playback stuttered. Tones appeared in her recordings that hadn't been present when she captured them. In the village square, she found the chapel. It stood taller than the other ruins, though it leaned to one side like a drunk. Lead plates had been nailed along the walls, now buckling with time. Salt crystals had burst from the seams, forming brittle webs. The door was ajar, and beyond it, the stair. The descent was immediate. Stone stairs spiraled downward into a crypt beneath the chapel. She expected tombs, bones, maybe an altar. Instead, she found a chamber of odd proportions, not square or circular, but something in between, like geometry was resisting classification. The acoustics were unnatural. Her footsteps returned to her half a second too late. Breaths came back inverted. Whispers multiplied. A pedestal stood at the center, and atop it, another reel. It was labeled E.H., Keeper's Confession. She played it. The voice was male, worn, unsteady. We thought we could contain it, with salt and prayer and lead. But it isn't the sound, it's the silence. It listens, it feeds. There were moments of madness in the tape, screams, scratches, an old hymn sung backward. Then the voice again. It remembers us. It becomes us. Mallory stumbled from the crypt with the tape, heart pounding. That night, in the ruins, she dreamed of voices calling her name in perfect mimicry. She stayed longer than intended. Each day brought new sounds, new tapes. Most weren't visible until she returned to her tent and unpacked her gear. Then they'd be there, nestled in her bag. Whispers grew bolder. They began responding to her questions, speaking in her voice. She began to lose time. Recordings played by themselves. Her own voice repeated words she had not said. The forest around the village grew darker, as though light feared approaching. Her journals filled with writing she didn't remember, describing events she hadn't experienced. And always, the breath. Software approaching. She wanted to leave. But every path she took circled back to the chapel. Even her compass spun aimlessly. The silence had become a maze. On the 7th day, she descended once more. This time the stair continued past the crypt, down a narrower passage. Roots broke through the stone. The air grew warmer. Wetter. Her recorder beeped wildly, then died. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, the Whispering Womb. A hollow in the earth so large the ceiling vanished in darkness. At its center, a pool of still water, black as void. She stepped closer. Sound warped. Her movements echoed in reverse. Voices called out from the water, merging into a chorus. All of them were hers, and then it spoke. Not aloud, not in words, but directly in her. A sensation like drowning in silence, being unraveled into vibration. It remembered her. It had always remembered her. Mallory doesn't recall returning. She awoke weeks later in a field miles away. Her equipment was melted, her notebook blank. Only one thing remained. A single reel. Pristine. She mailed it anonymously to her mentor. He played it once. It was a recording of Mallory breathing, then whispering, then weeping, then silence, and then, unmistakably, his own voice asking, "Who's there?" It ends there. But the reel keeps spinning. Weeks after the reel stopped playing, Mallory's mentor began receiving voicemails from an unlisted number. Always the same. Silence, then his own voice whispering from the static. "You heard it too." But he never said those words. And now, in the stillest moments of night, when the house holds its breath, the reel begins to spin again. On its own.